Good evening, parents. My name is Lelaine Perez, and I'm the Executive Director of Language Development for the school district, and I'd like to welcome you all tonight to our parent workshop. We're happy that you could be here tonight, and this is going to be a great presentation, so feel free to pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea and enjoy this workshop. I'd like to introduce our presenter tonight, and perhaps you have attended some of her workshops before. She's fantastic. She is Elizabeth Gianulis, and she is our Director of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, and she's going to be presenting how to build resiliency. So welcome, Elizabeth. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and have her begin, and Mrs. Pimentel will go ahead and project the presentation on the screen. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it was nice when I saw people signing in. There's some familiar names and faces, so I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen, so just give me just a second to do that. All right, oops. Let's see. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm hoping that everyone is seeing the screen now. And I think this presentation is especially important and needed. It's been a really tough 13 and a half, almost 14 months now. So I think having a topic on resiliency hopefully is something that speaks true to maybe what you need right now. So let's go over the idea of what even is resilience, right? So resilience is the ability to tackle adversity and the ability to emerge even stronger than before. So when we're talking about adversity, it can really be a range of experiences. And these experiences can impact your children in different ways, even if they've been exposed to the same experience. So this could include something like a tragedy. It could include, COVID and switching over to distance learning and not being able to go to graduations or see friends. It could be a natural disaster, a serious friendship issue, school problems, a parental divorce, trauma. It really boils down to any type of stress that can have a significant impact. And then when someone is resilient, it's how well that person's able to adapt to that stress in their life. So a person or a child who's really resilient is someone who's able to bounce back and to pick him or herself up and to keep going. Okay? And if you wouldn't mind just muting your mics unless you have a question, that'll be really helpful. Okay. When we talk about resiliency, another thing that often also comes up is grit. Okay, and so grit and resiliency are similar, but there's also some differences. So grit's similar to resilience in that there's perseverance, but it's perseverance for things that you're passionate about and long-term goals. Okay, so it's where you can think of grit as where passion and perseverance meet in order to achieve a long-term goal. So it includes really sustaining attention and interest and effort and persisting in something that you're really passionate about. Okay, so it's very, very different. So sometimes I'll have parents say to me, well, I wish that my child was grittier. I wish that they had more grit for, cleaning their room or for maybe doing a really hard and challenging math task. And what we need to go back to and say, okay, well, maybe you wish that your child persevered through that, but are they really passionate about cleaning the room? Or are they passionate about math? They may be, they may not be, okay? So that's just a little bit of a difference there. But I wanted to point out grit and bring that up because grit is really, really important. So what's interesting about grit is that it's actually the best indicator of future success. So children and students who tend to have higher levels of grit are more likely to graduate from high school, more likely to graduate from college. It's actually a better predictor than SAT scores. People who have higher levels of grit are more likely to stay in teaching positions and even to remain married. So if you want to find out more about grit, I highly recommend that you check out the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. There's a quote here that I think is really important. Without grit, talent may be nothing more than unmet potential. It is only with effort that talent becomes a skill that leads to success. Okay, and so what happened was Angela Duckworth is a psychologist who was studying the idea of grit and came up with a grit scale when she was looking at West Point. So for West Point, I don't know if you guys are very familiar, but it's actually a 2-year process to get into West Point. And it even includes, it's very rigorous, and it even includes needing to get nominated by a US representative, a senator, or the vice president, right? So it takes a lot of work to get into West Point. And before the start of your freshman year at West Point, there's this 6-week thing that's really rigorous, includes lots of physical activity, and they call it the Beast Barracks. And these young adults who've worked so hard to get into West Point, there's a decent amount of students who actually drop out in that 6 weeks. And so Angela Duckworth was given the task of figuring out and predicting which students would be most likely to drop out, even though they are usually have incredibly high grade point averages, incredibly high SAT scores, and are often the captain of sports teams, very involved in schools. And so they found that her grit scale is highly predictive. So if you're more interested in finding out about that, I recommend that you check out the book Grit, and also look up the grit scale, which you can take for free just by Googling grit, right? And what's nice about grit is that just like the next thing that we'll be talking about, it's not set. You can develop your grit, you can develop your resiliency. So that's what we'll be focusing on tonight when we think about our children. Okay, and so to have grit, you usually need to have a growth mindset. And this is something that our kids are learning about in the classroom. So you might want to tonight ask your kids, what is a growth mindset, and see what they know about it. But a growth mindset is a belief that most basic abilities, so that it actually includes your intelligence, can be developed through hard work and just through dedication. So to kind of go over this a little bit and talk about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, somebody with a fixed mindset tends to think that their skills and abilities are just set. So you're born with a set of skills. Yeah, maybe you can improve them a little bit, but they're pretty set. You're born with a certain amount of intelligence, and it's just the way that it is. Where somebody with a growth mindset believes that you can develop those over time. So it's like seeing the brain as a muscle that can improve, right? When faced with challenges, people with a fixed mindset tend to kind of stay away from challenges, right? They think of them as something to avoid because it might actually show weakness. And then somebody with a growth mindset actually tends to embrace challenges. They see them as an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to be more persistent. And then effort, somebody with a growth mindset thinks that it's essential, that it's a path to mastery, whereas somebody with a fixed mindset might think that, okay, well, that's just something you do when you're not quite good enough. Okay. And then I'm going to just go over the last one real quick, setbacks. When there's setbacks, people with a fixed mindset tend to blame others, get discouraged, maybe kind of just stay away from a task. Where somebody with a growth mindset uses it as maybe a learning opportunity or a wake-up call to put in more effort for the next time. So tonight we'll be talking about how to really encourage our students to become resilient to become gritty, and to have a growth mindset. And so something sort of fun that I thought that I would share are 4 different examples of adults who have been incredibly resilient. And of course, we want our kids to have these skills. So if we look at the pictures here, on the top upper left side, we see a pretty famous author, J.K. Rowling, right? So she wrote all the Harry Potter series. And what's interesting, if you know anything about her life, she was actually on government assistance. She was a single mom, and all 12 major publishing houses rejected Harry Potter initially, right? So she struggled, but she kept persisting. She had grit. She definitely had a growth mindset to get Harry Potter published. And now, of course, she's an incredibly famous and successful author. So the upper right, we have Oprah Winfrey, of course. Most of us, I'm sure, know who she is. And you probably know a little bit about her life story. So she had an incredibly challenging childhood that included some pretty serious abuse. And she actually gave birth at the age of 14, right? So she had a very difficult childhood. And what's interesting that most of us probably didn't know was that the first nightly news job that she was fired from that job because they said that she was too emotional with guests. And what's interesting is that I think we could probably all agree that's what's made her so successful and popular is that she's emotional with guests, right? That she's not afraid to show that side of her and to be vulnerable. So she obviously persisted and had a lot of resilience. All right, the bottom left. So I'm not sure if you know, but that's a picture of Thomas Edison. And what's interesting about him, and I certainly didn't know this, I know it obviously took him, I knew it took him a while to invent the electric light bulb, but it actually took him over 10,000 tries to do that. And then the bottom right, of course, that's Michael Jordan. Many people would say best basketball player, one of the best certainly of all time. And what's interesting here, and I didn't know this until I researched it, but he was actually cut from his varsity high school basketball team and placed back on JV. Okay, so many kids in his predicament maybe would have given up and quit playing basketball altogether. Good thing he didn't. He was very resilient and persistent, and obviously had a lot of grit because he had passion and perseverance for basketball. Okay, so those are some fun stories that will hopefully inspire us tonight. So now I'm going to share how we can really build resiliency and grit in our children while encouraging a growth mindset. And I'm going to go through a few slides, and I'll pause to see if there's questions, but I'll also leave time for some questions at the end too. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? So one of the first things that we want to do with our children is we want to encourage them to explore different interests and to pursue their passions. Okay, so we want to encourage, and there's a really great visual here, to find things that they're interested in. Remember, this is one of the hallmarks of grit, right? We want them to develop those passions so that way they can pursue them over time. And if you're concerned, because you can say, well, Elizabeth, you just said before that when you're gritty, you also have perseverance. And what if my child has a tendency to go from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing? Well, in elementary school, that is quite normal, right? It takes time. We don't expect a 6-year-old to know what they want to do for the rest of their life or to know what they're passionate about, okay? So when we have students who are younger, children who are a little bit younger, yes, of course, they're going to go from thing to thing. And we want to encourage them to explore different interests. Now, the big thing is here, once they explore those interests and they get a little bit older, upper elementary school, we want them to have and develop some stick-with-itness. So I'm sorry, that's a hard word to translate, right? But we want them to be able to find things that they're really interested in and sort of stick to those. But in the beginning, we want them just to explore a bunch of different things so we can find out what they're interested in. And this sounds easy, but is sometimes challenging because as parents, we have a tendency to sort of maybe convince our kids to be interested in the things that we're interested in. And that might be a start, right? But we also want them to find their own interests and their own passions, okay? So after we've done some exploration, we want to find at least one extracurricular activity for your child to pursue long-term. And when we do this, we might say, okay, well, how about we find something with school? And that's great. If it's something academics, that's fantastic and that's awesome. But sports fields, so sports are really good things to look into because they're often described as the playing fields of grit. And the reason for this is there's two really important factors here that are hard to replicate academically or in other settings. So one thing is there's usually a pretty supportive but also demanding adult who's in charge. So that's usually the coach, right? So this person is going to push them past what they're normally capable of or what they even knew that they were capable of. The second thing is that sports they're designed to really cultivate interest, practice, purpose, and hope. Okay, so something that they're passionate about that they really have to practice a skill with. So there tend to be setbacks. Things are hard. They might lose a game. They may get cut from a team. And it's a great opportunity for our kids to learn at a young age to keep practicing, to keep trying to get better, even though maybe they lost a game, right? So Angela Duckworth, the person who wrote the book Grit and coined that term, in her household, she has this hard thing rule where at any given time, everybody in the house has to pursue one thing that's really hard. Okay, so that could be sports, it could be a musical instrument, it could be an academic interest, but they always have to be pursuing something that's a little bit hard. And so many of our kids, and this might come up for you, they might be really interested in, let's say, baseball, and then they might discover over the course of time that things are getting a little bit hard and they might want to quit. And so you'll have to discover and work out as a family how you want to handle this. Many families, and this is something I recommend to try or at least consider, come up with a rule that if you commit to something, you at least have to stay committed for at least that season. or at least that term. So maybe they signed up for a music class, or they want to pursue something, in an art class, that at least for that season, or at least for the length of that course, that they stick with it and try even when things get challenging. Okay. And then maybe after that season or after that course, at that point, as a family, you can sit down and determine if that's something they want to stick with, or something that maybe they need to find a new passion that they want to work on pursuing long term. Okay. I'm going to share one more, and then I'll kind of step back and see if there's any questions, and you can feel free to put those in chat. And also, when we're having our question time, you can also feel free to unmute if you have a question to ask too. Okay, so another thing, and I shared some of these inspiring stories with you, but another thing is with your kids, really sharing stories of people who have persevered. There's an image there of one of my favorite movies, Rudy. I don't know if you've seen it. It's an old movie, but still a fun one to watch. And it's really very inspiring about a young man who has a dream and a goal of playing. It's based on a true story of playing football for Notre Dame, and he faces enormous setbacks and challenges and perseveres. And it's really an inspiring movie. Okay, so some other things to share with your kids. So we already shared the idea of Thomas Edison and the light bulb, that it took him over 10,000 attempts to create the electric light bulb. But another thing, in case you have a Dyson vacuum at home, it took over 5,000 attempts. That was a number of prototypes developed by James Dyson to create the Dyson vacuum. So some fun things to sort of share with your kids. Also fun ways to read books about people who are gritty, to watch movies about people who are gritty and developed really great resilience. Those things are inspiring for all of us. They're especially inspiring for our children. Okay, so let's take a look now and just see if you have any questions so far. I'm not seeing anything in chat, but I'm going to give you a minute in case you want to include anything there. And also, if you want to unmute, feel free to unmute so you can ask some questions as well. Okay, so let's see if we have any questions so far. Okay, so I'm not seeing any, so I'm actually going to ask a question of you. So if you want to write in chat if there is a person, a movie, a book that you find really inspiring that you might want to share with your kids, if you can just go ahead and write that in chat, and we'll read out some of the ones that we get. So somebody who's inspiring that you might want to share with your kids. And again, it could be a person, it could be a movie, a book that you might want to share with them. Go ahead, feel free to write that in chat. We have quite a few people on this meeting, so let's see what we have coming in. And Hella, could you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think I hope everyone contributes to the conversation. There's so many great books and stories and movies out there. I know like Charlotte's Web was always a really sweet one. And Neverending Story, that movie, it was definitely like a kid's cast, a very fantasy world, but the kids were the protagonists. They were literally saving the worlds, right? The fantasy world and our real world. So I thought they were really, really fun, inspiring ones. But there's so many to pick from, and I hope everyone takes the time to find some if you can't think of any off the top of your head.
So I'll share two. So I shared Rudy, and Rudy for me was always, as a child, it was my favorite one. So I just showed it to my nephew recently, and he thought that it was really good, but he told me he thought Mighty Ducks was more inspiring, but he still liked it. And a funny story about Rudy too, when I was in early stages of labor, it happened to be on TV, and I was like, all right, this will be my inspiration. Because it's one of the movies that I love. But please check those things out with your kids and don't be afraid to share. It looks like we have another hand up. I think it's Fernanda, if I'm reading that.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes. I really like the movie The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. You can find it right now on Netflix. And it's about a little boy that in South Africa that build a mill to get water to get them through the drought. It's a really, really inspiring movie. How this little boy had no money to go to school, but he just asked, "Can I use the library at least?" And that's how he did it. And it's a based on a true story. It's really, really inspiring.
Thank you so much. I actually wrote that down. So The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind.
Yes.
I haven't seen it myself. If I stay up late watching a movie tonight, I'm going to thank you for that. So I'm excited to check that one out. All right, so there's some good ideas. And if you have any others, please feel free to just put them in the chat, and then we'll kind of go back to our presentation now, okay? So you can share movies, books, stories about people, whether they're fictional or real, who really showed a lot of perseverance, okay? So another thing that we want to do when we're encouraging resilience in our kids, we want to look at our parenting style. So there's a ton of research on 4 parenting styles that are the most dominant that we have, and I'll go through all 4 of them. And there's one that really sticks out in every type of research that shows that this is has the most positive outcomes and also encourages resiliency in our kids, okay? And so you can think of these on a continuum as having very high expectations or low expectations and very high levels of support or low levels of support. So on the upper left there, the authoritarian parenting style. So this is one where there's super high expectations and a lot of discipline, but low levels of emotional support, okay? So that's on our continuum of expectations. Now on the bottom left, we have uninvolved, and this type of parenting is one where there's very low expectations, low or no expectations, and very low levels of support. So low on both of the continuums there, okay? So not shown to be very successful for our kids. The one on the upper left, the first one, authoritarian, we tend to have some compliance, but we tend to have kids who tend to be a little bit more scared and are a lot less likely to take risks. So they tend to develop more fixed mindsets because they're afraid to take challenges because they might get it wrong and they might be punished. Okay. On the bottom right there, we have a parenting style called permissive. And this is the one I like to nickname the grandparent style. And grandparents should be here, right? But as parents, we might not want to strive for this one. So this is super high levels of emotional support, but very low expectations and discipline, okay? So this tends to be, again, that grandparent approach where we give our kids what we want, we're there for them, we love them, but we don't really have the high expectations. And then there's the final one, authoritative. Now this one, it sounds similar to authoritarian, but it's very, very different. This is kind of the best of both worlds. So we have high expectations for our kids, so we expect a lot of them. We have rules, we stick to those, we have discipline, but we couple that with very high levels of emotional support. So we're also there for our kids emotionally. We help them achieve their goals, right? So they achieve them, but we help them and we guide them. So that type of parenting has been shown to be incredibly successful, and especially so in developing kids with resiliency and grit and growth mindsets, okay? So high levels of support coupled with high expectations, okay? So it's something to really think about when we're parenting our kids. Now it's also, we want to be honest with ourselves. We've probably been in all 4 quadrants at different times in our life for different reasons, right? But we want to strive as much as possible to have that authoritative parenting style where we provide the high expectations coupled with high levels of support. Okay, so with our kids, we also want to make sure that we help them build and develop growth mindsets. So besides having that parenting style and sharing stories of people who've persevered, we want to help our children understand that the brain works like a muscle. Okay, so it can develop and it can grow over time. Now, this might sound counterintuitive, it might be a little bit tricky, but we actually want to avoid telling our kids that they're smart. And you might say, well, why would we do that? Okay, so what happens is when our kids over time hear, oh, you're smart, you're smart, you're smart, the hidden message there is that they achieved something because of a natural ability and not because of effort. Okay, so instead we want to be very specific with our praise. So rather than saying, you know, you're smart, We want to specifically praise them for what they did that we want to continue seeing. And I'll share a story with you, and I've shared this before if you've happened to be at some of my other trainings, but this is a true story. A kid that I went to high school with, he graduated #1 in our class. He got into Caltech, which is an incredibly competitive school. And I believe he actually got a maybe even a full scholarship, I want to say, to Caltech. And he in high school, just to put things into perspective, I remember him very kindly teaching our AP chemistry teacher, how to solve problems. Things just came very naturally to him, at least in academics they did. And so he got into Caltech, and all of a sudden he was surrounded by a bunch of other students who things came very easily and very naturally to. Okay. And again, this kid was somebody he would describe as brilliant. And his whole life he was told, you're smart, you're smart, you're smart, you're smart. Well, all of a sudden in college, things became very challenging and he wasn't used to that. And after a semester of college, he ended up dropping out of Caltech. Okay. So somebody who you thought would be the leader, would be incredibly successful, ended up dropping out. And part of that, again, is his whole life that he was given a message that he was smart. So the first time he faced a challenge and adversity, he didn't know how to handle it. Okay, so luckily for this young man, he had an incredibly, and continues to have, an incredibly supportive family. And he ended up, going back to school, and he actually went to UCLA. And what's great now is that he's actually a professor at UCLA and is incredibly successful, thankfully, to this, probably a big part due to the support of his family. But that's one of those reasons in the stories that we just like to share. And I know a lot of kids in college who were incredibly high achievers in high school and really struggled in college because things came easily to them. Okay, so we want to make sure with our kids that they face challenges. So that they face challenges and that they learn to persevere. We also want to avoid telling them that they achieve things because they're smart. Instead, we want to be specific with our praise and let them know that we're so proud of them for the hard work that they have. And we also want to praise, so that we want to praise their effort, right? We also want to make sure that we praise creative problem solving, and this is really important too. We do not want to praise our kids for their effort if they're trying the same thing over and over and over again and it's not working. So we want to also make sure that we praise them for trying new things, for maybe being brave enough to try something even if it's not right at first, and to keep persevering. Okay, we want to encourage a healthy attitude to failure and challenge. So, and this goes by how we show our kids this, and we model it for them as well. So we want to make sure that when we fail at something, right, that we look at it as an opportunity to try something different or to try again and to keep on persevering. Okay. And the same thing with our kids. When they fail at something initially, we want to get from there, not immediately when they're upset, but when they've had a chance to calm down. We want to talk to them and kind of figure out what they've learned from this and what they might do differently the next time. And we want to encourage them to keep trying, okay, and to have that stick with itness. And finally, and this is my favorite, we have a whole SEL newsletter about this, but we want to use the word yet. And an example of this, when our kids or when we catch ourselves accidentally saying we can't do something or we're not good at something. So for instance, oh man, I'm just really not good at science. We want to say, oh, you're not good at science yet, right? So it encourages that growth mindset. Or, I'm really not a good dancer. Oh, no. You're not a good dancer yet. If you took classes, you could continue to get better and improve, right? So that's one of those words, and we will accidentally say this all the time, but a nice easy fix, just add the word yet at the end. If we find ourselves or our kids saying, I'm not good at something, or I can't do this, you just add that word yet to it. Okay, so we talked about reading books about inspiring people. There's also lots of great books out there now about resiliency and about growth mindset. So here are 4 of them that you might want to check out. And what's fantastic is that most of these are also on YouTube. There's readings of them, or they're at the library for free, so not even things that you need to purchase. So one is Your Fantastic Elastic Brain. So this is great. This is specifically about developing a growth mindset and how our brain is elastic and can grow and change over time. Another one, but maybe for our kids who are in the primary grades or younger students, is Bubblegum Brain. So same exact idea as Your Fantastic Elastic Brain, but probably better for 3rd grade and below. Okay. The Most Magnificent Thing. Oh gosh, I love that book. That is, and I don't, there's the picture right there. Sorry, the upper left one. This is about when you think everything's gone wrong and you can make an even better thing from those mistakes, right? Or from something that's not quite right. So a really fun book. And then Beautiful Oops, very similar there. Another great story of sort of making the best out of something that you didn't think was. So these are great picture books for elementary school age, all the way K through 6, except like I said, the first one probably upper elementary, the second one probably for our primary or younger kiddos. Okay. So you might want to take a picture of this slide if you're interested in these books. So I'll give you a second before I change on to the next slide. All right. So another thing that we want to do, and this is so hard to do with our kids, but we want to allow our kids to struggle and take risks without us intervening right away. I purposely have a image here of a child doing a puzzle because I know with my little one at home is still pretty little, and I find myself catching myself here too. But with my nieces, when they were growing up, this was something that I really struggled with, specifically with puzzles, right? So I would see my niece struggling and I would want to go in and just put the puzzle in the right spot for them. But what we really want to do is allow our kids to struggle and to think of ways to creatively solve things or to persevere or develop resiliency by allowing them to struggle a little bit. And this isn't just with puzzles or with homework. It's also when our kids are visiting parks, they're on the playground and they get into maybe a little bit of a disagreement with another child at the playground, right? And we want to step in and we want to intervene and we want to make sure that that other kid apologizes. First, let's actually help our kids by stepping back and letting them try to solve the problem first, okay? And then if we need to step in, we can. Or if we need to maybe help guide our child, we can. So the puzzle example is a little bit easier. So if a child's struggling putting together a puzzle, first we want to give them an opportunity. If they're still struggling and really can't figure it out, we might want to say, one of the techniques that I use is to find all the edge pieces first. Maybe let's try that. Or, oh, does it look like this piece fits here? Same thing with homework, right? Or academic tasks. When our child's struggling, allow them to struggle first, try to solve it out, then give them hints, coach them, but don't solve it for them. I like to think of ourselves as a coach. And again, same thing with friendships. Step back, then maybe provide some coaching. And then afterwards, we'll want to go ahead and talk about that task or that dilemma with our kids and figure out, okay, well, what worked really well? What was maybe a challenge? What might we do differently the next time? Okay, so those are some things. And I have some questions that might guide us on the next one. But again, sounds very easy, but very hard to actually implement. Okay, and then we want to encourage and praise creative problem solving. Okay, so again, allowing our child to struggle with support. Encouraging our children to think and try other options. So those are things we just talked about. This is specifically with academics. Praising effort and attempts at choosing other solutions. So I mentioned Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book Grit. So Carol Dweck is really the person who coined the term growth mindset and wrote a book about that as well. And one of the things that she really points out is that initially people thought that we should just praise effort, and that's how you encourage a growth mindset. But like I mentioned before, she actually said, you're on the right track if you praise effort. Absolutely, we want to do that. But we also want to make sure that we praise our kids' attempts at trying different solutions and not, again, just trying the same thing over and over again and it not working out for them. Okay, so we're going to allow our kids to struggle. We're going to encourage them to try other options. We want to praise that effort and attempts at other solutions. And then at that point, we want to provide guidance as needed. So specifically with academics. And here's what's really key. And it's hard because sometimes we're just in such a rush to get it done or to complete a task. We want to stay calm. Okay, so if we're trying to encourage our kids to have resiliency, one of the things that they need to do to be resilient is have really strong emotional intelligence. So we need to model that for them as well. And one of the biggest pieces of emotional intelligence is the ability to stay regulated and stay calm. So if we need to take a little break, or we need to offer a break to our child so they can calm down, sometimes just having a quick drink of water, walk outside, time to play, we come back refreshed and we're able to think of different ways to solve the same problem. Okay, so offer breaks as needed. So that's really, really important here. I'm going to share some of my favorite books, and then it looks like we have about 5 minutes for questions. Okay, So these are some of my favorite books when I'm thinking about, even working with my own child and developing these skills. So one of my absolute favorites is How Children Succeed, Grit, Curiosity, and the Hidden Power of Character. This is just a fantastic book. And it's a recent book too. I think it just came out last year. Another one, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. So Carol Dweck, like I said, is a person who developed the terms growth mindset and fixed mindset. So I think you might find that one interesting. Another one of, How Children Succeed is actually a few years old. The newer one is The Power of Showing Up. This one's just fantastic and also talks about the idea of resiliency and grit and growth mindset. So The Power of Showing Up is a really fantastic book. And then Grit, which is one of my personal favorites by Angela Duckworth. And she actually spent time as a classroom teacher before she went back and got her PhD. So she talks about that and her experiences with her own kids as well. So I think that you'll find it's a pretty good read. It might give you some insight and some great ideas when working with your own kids. Okay, so I hope that those 4 books are some ones that you might find interesting. So I'm going to give you a second in case you want to capture this slide. And then I'm going to unshare my screen so that way we have time for some questions or even just sharing if you want to do that as well. Okay, so I'm not sharing my screen anymore. So that way we have some time for questions. So if you want to, whatever you're most comfortable with, if you want to ask them or put them in chat. Okay, and I'm looking here. So it looks like we have, can we please see the screen with books? And are the books for kids or parents? Okay, so, all right. And I'm seeing some other things. Maybe it just took a while for some of the chat to come out, so I'll share those as well. So the last books I shared are for adults. The other books I shared are for kids. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, just to sort of show. So these books that you're seeing right now are for adults. Okay, at least if you have kids that are in high school, they might find these interesting, but I think definitely more adults here. And then these books are for kids. And this is really elementary school aged kids. If you have little ones, they might still like the Most Magnificent Thing and Beautiful Oops, but probably at least preschool age even for those ones. Okay, and again, Bubblegum Brain, early elementary, The Fantastic Elastic Brain, upper elementary. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing again so I can access chat more easily. Okay, and we have a bunch of people put more things in there. So Angelica added Charlotte's Web, A Never Ending Story. We have, I don't know that one, Ernest Shackleton. I'm not sure, so I'll have to look into that. Apollo 13, fantastic. Moana, The Great Debaters, Dead Poet Society, great movie. So lots of great Over the Moon, lots of great examples there of books and movies, freedom riders when they're older. Fantastic. Okay, the first set, thank you. So you got the books. All right, it doesn't look like there's any other questions. I do see a hand. Dave, I think, had his hand up.
Yeah, so I'm the one that suggested Ernest Shackleton. There was a book. I'm not sure if there was a movie or a documentary, but there's a book called Shackleton, and he led some teams to Antarctica on one of the expeditions by ship. They got caught in the ice crushed their boat, and he was able to guide the crew back to civilization and rescue without losing a single member of the crew. It's just a fantastic story about grit and perseverance.
Thank you so much for that recommendation. So I have 2 really good recommendations now, and I'll have to look into that one for sure. Thank you for sharing that. All right, I think any milestones that might suggest resiliency. Oh, that's a good question. That's a hard one. So it's not necessarily milestones. So what you really want to look for instead with your kids, and remember, when we're talking about resiliency and a growth mindset, if you're seeing, oh my gosh, my child gives up easily when they lose a game, they just want to quit, that's all normal and part of childhood. So don't panic. Remember, it's a growth mindset. We can improve these things over time. Okay, so what you might, rather than maybe a milestone, some things that you might see for resiliency, if you notice that your child is sticking with certain activities over time. If you notice that when things get challenging, that they don't quite give up. And it could be something from as simple as a video game or a puzzle, or maybe their homework or a sports or team activity that they're involved with, and they keep trying and practicing. Those are all things to look for where you're seeing that they've developed some resiliency, right? And we really want to praise those things with our kids. If you have a child that's really into Legos, a lot of those sets are not easy and they take time and it takes a lot of struggle. So again, those are some good things to look for in our kids that are showing that they have some resiliency, and we want to praise them for that. The harder, more challenging things come from some things when they get a little bit older, when academic tasks start getting a little bit harder, or maybe they start having some more natural part of development, friendship issues with kids, seeing that they're able to find those skills to work it out. And again, if we think of ourselves as a coach and coach them through that rather than telling them what to do, that's what tends to be best for our kids. Okay, but the big thing is looking for our kids, catching them doing these things, and then making sure that we're praising them for those efforts. Just don't panic, though. I'll tell you from personal experience, my brother, when we were growing up, I remember he used to go through every week, it seemed like he had a new interest. It was hockey one week, then he wanted to play the piano the next week, then he wanted to be a scientist the following week. My parents would get all these things and then he'd be over it. And again, that's when he was really little, and that's normal, but then you want to kind of encourage them and guide them to find a few things that they're really interested in. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been a pleasure as always. And I'm just reading at the last comment right here. Take risks. So I have not been allowing my son to struggle or take risks. I tend to avoid tasks that I know will cause him to have a meltdown. Do you have any recommendations on how to get through those meltdowns? Oh my gosh, thank you for being so brave for sharing that, because that is so true. A lot of us as parents, we struggle, right? We don't want to let our kids take risks or to struggle because it hurts us to see that. Any recommendations on how to get him through those meltdowns? So part of it is just setting your child up for success by letting them know up front that, well, here's an example. So when you're playing games with your kids, don't let them win every time, right? So that's one that's really hard. So you'll want to set your child up for success at first by letting them know, hey, mom's really good at this game, or dad's really good at this game. And I'm not going to play easy on you. And then letting them know sort of what a good sport does, right? So a good sport congratulates even when they lose. You might tease the other person, you might be upset about it, but you're willing to play again, right? So that's an example of a small way to take a risk and to sort of work through that. And meltdowns are normal and expected. My big thing for that is let your child have the meltdown, let them calm down. And then once they're calm, once they've had space to compose themselves, that's when you then go talk about it and talk about, how might you handle this the next time? So that way this doesn't bother you as much. And that's so hard because we don't want to let our kids have meltdowns. We don't want to go through that. It's very stressful. But sometimes we have to give them time and space to work through that. And then we're still there. We're still encouraging them afterwards. But the big key there is don't try to talk to your kids about that and problem solve it while they're still upset. So even if they're not actively having, and I'm pointing my pen here, but even if they're not actively in the meltdown, they're probably still upset. So we want to make sure that they've had the meltdown, they've recovered. We give them, I'd say, a minimum of 10 minutes before we really start problem solving. It might be as much as an hour or 2 hours, or even the next day with some of our kids who really might be festering on it. Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you found this helpful.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that wonderful presentation. And parents, thank you for participating and contributing your ideas and thoughts and asking questions. At this time, Angelica Maldonado, our parent liaison, has some announcements for us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Ms. Gianulis and to Mrs. Perez, who allow me a few minutes just to add. For those of you who aren't joining us on the next meeting, in our DAC-DLAC meeting, this is our pre-parent workshop. I just want to make sure that you can share in our community that there has been 2 different vaccine site events that have been shared with me. So one is for older adults and anyone who has family members that are disabled. There is access to a vaccination clinic on Friday pardon me, this one's on Friday, but I have another one for tomorrow, the 30th, and you can email me or call 211. They will be offering Moderna, and this is going to be, that's really important. There's about 50 slots that, really cater to folks that are disabled and elderly. Another one that's coming up tomorrow afternoon is at the Civic Center branch library here, and that they have a lot more vaccines. Now that vaccine is Johnson & Johnson's, and if you have any questions, concerns, I have some handouts that I can share in the chat and or share during the DAC-DLAC meeting as well. I'll put my email as well. I just wanted to give those 2 tidbits since this is vaccination time, and we really want to make sure that our family members that are elderly have access, and for folks now, since the laws have changed, for anyone who's 18 and above, they are candidates to get vaccinated. So please ask if you I know 211 is hard to get through, but you have someone here at the district who's more than happy to update you and share any resources in our community. There's lots more to share, but I just wanted to keep it nice and sweet. And I look forward to hearing and seeing you all in the very near future and at the DAC-DLAC meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. So at this time, this concludes our parent workshop. So thank you all for coming. In just a few short moments at 6 o'clock, we begin our general session for DAC-DLAC. And so we hope to see some of you then at 6 o'clock using the same link. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.